Welcome to the Real Photo Show. My guest today is Yolanda del Amo, who is a photographer and professor at Ramapo State College right here in New Jersey. And we will talk about that, especially the changes that we've had to make with our own practices and our own ways of teaching because we have basically taught through the fall and the rise of film photography. Also, we are going to talk about Yolanda's new book. Actually, that is the main reason why we are talking. Archipelago, published by Kehrer Verlag. And Archipelago is a metaphor for disconnect and isolation that people feel in relationships, even though they're part of the same world. And that's a really great conversation as well. And then what else? Yeah, we're going to talk about Yolanda's background and how she ends up in a German school while she lives in Spain. And we'll talk about her love of theater and dance and film and how that plays into the staging of her photography and so much more. It's a really, really wonderful conversation. But of course, this podcast is sponsored by the Charcoal Book Club. Begin building or continue to build your dream photo book library today at charcoalbookclub.com. Both books have shipped. Italian Story by Andrea Modica and In the Flap of a Bird's Wing, Water Dries Up by Errico Masoca, and I will post those real soon. Also, boy, I forgot to bring this up on my screen. Let me just bring up my Instagram account. Let's see. It should be here. Hi, everyone on Instagram. Yes. Dan Bassini, a former student of mine, is celebrating 10 years of his work called No Invite, where he sneaks into fashion shows in New York. And it's going to be a fantastic show and celebration. Can't wait. Hey, everyone who's posting comments. All right, everyone. So that will be September 9th. Reception. There'll be a live talk on the Real Photo Show YouTube channel, so check that out. If you can't make it, of course, we'd love to see you. The show will be up the 3rd through the 15th, and I'll have real gallery hours very soon. The semester is about to begin, and we're all gearing up. So, all right, everyone. I got through this without my dog barking, which is fantastic because I've had to stop 3 times now. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the show, and we will talk soon. Good morning, Yolanda.
Good morning, Michael.
It's so nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you too. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're almost neighbors, professor-wise.
Yes, I saw it on the map. You're further down in New Jersey, right?
I'm in Central Jersey at Mercer County, and you are at Ramapo.
Ramapo College, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
We missed each other by, I think, about 3 years. I taught there, I think, until about... longer. You started in 2010, right?
I did.
I left there 2005.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you know Warner Wada.
Oh, sure.
Yes.
Yes, love Warner.
Yes, love Warner too. And Anne Lepore.
And Lepore is a friend of mine. I think maybe even before Ramapo. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. Well, I'm sure the audience is riveted by this conversation about Ramapo and Mercer.
Right.
But it is something I want to talk about later, and that is teaching. But before we get to all that, why don't you just tell us about yourself and where you grew up and how you get into photography and all those things?
Of course. So I grew up in Spain. I was born in Spain into a Spanish family. And this was the end of the Franco era. So Spain was a very different country than it is now. So it was a country that had been closed off from the world for many years. And so my parents wanted to give me an education that was more expansive and that exposed me to other cultures. And I went to a German school in Madrid, and I started my education from kindergarten and stayed all the way to high school, and grew up speaking German and really bilingual and bicultural.
Mm-hmm.
And that prepared me to go to Germany. I actually moved to Germany at a pretty young age to attend the university, and my first love was mathematics. So I went to the university in Cologne and I graduated in mathematics, and I started working as a mathematician, as an actuary, doing calculations about mortality rate. So something that
Wow.
is not exactly very joyful and fun, but I was lucky enough that that corporation relocated me to Argentina. And that was a very decisive period for me, because in Argentina, I connected to a lot of artists and dancers, choreographers, painters, because in my upbringing, I was really more exposed to artists than to corporate folks, because my father is a writer, he's a filmmaker, he's a playwright, and so it was very familiar for me to attend rehearsals, to go to the movies, to read a lot, and so that was the kind of the environment that I gravitated towards more naturally. And it just happened that way in Argentina. And in that context, I started taking a photography class. And there it is a little bit less institutionalized. So you go to the workshop of a photographer, and then you have these open critique groups. And I studied with Eduardo Gil, who was a very well-known photographer in Argentina, and that was a game changer for me. I fell in love with the medium. I suddenly found something that had all the qualities that I felt comfortable for expressing myself, and I started changing in my mind towards becoming an artist. And so just by coincidence, my ex-husband, now at that time my husband, he was offered a job in the United States. So we moved from Argentina to Cambridge, Massachusetts. And then I took that opportunity to quit my job and to maybe think about really a career change. And I started taking photography classes, first in continuing education. Then I realized I needed something more rigorous, and I attended RISD and graduated from RISD. And since then, I've been living in New York, teaching, and living as an artist and educator.
Yeah, you taught at ICP, you taught at blanking on the SUNY college that I love.
Purchase,
yes.
Exactly.
Sorry, Purchase. I just blanked on its name all of a sudden. What's interesting is you did grow up, well, your father is a filmmaker and a writer, and you did grow up with the arts and theater, and that will play and still does play a huge role in your photography. But you ended up going towards mathematics initially. Do you remember that decision and how that happened?
I loved mathematics, and there was something so clear about it. And there was something easy for me at that time. It ended up being much harder at the university. Of course, it was a test in humility because, I guess that happens to all mathematicians who think they're very good in high school, and then they just enter this other environment. But of course, the best ones of every school are together. And so it's a very tough discipline, but I loved it. And it's funny because my great-grandfather was a mathematician, and in Madrid, he didn't really practice as a mathematician. He had a PhD, and he had a store where he sold, religious iconography, little cards for First Communion. And it was in a very prominent place in Madrid, and like statues of saints and that kind of thing. I don't even know how you name that in English, that kind of merchandise, or that kind of those kinds of products. And I always joked with my friends and said, well, this is going to be my career. I'm going to open, or I'm going to follow the lineage of my great-grandfather. Because at that time, mathematics was not really a career like it is now with, data science or computer science. There was none of that. It was considered something useless and something more like philosophy.
I was going to say it was considered more like philosophy, as an art form, practically.
Something. And I also gravitated towards pure mathematics and not applied mathematics. So so I didn't really think about just an application, and that I ended up doing insurance. This reinsurance company that I worked for 7 years was really just, those things that happen in life when you think you need a job.
Yes, sure. I had a similar experience. I also love math, and I really was quite passionate about it in high school with calculus and all. And then when I went to study engineering out of high school, and I was with all the very smart engineers and doing much higher level calculus and physics, I realized, I'm just mediocre at this.
Right. Yes. It is. It really puts you right in perspective, and there's they're like the range of genius is goes quite high, right?
That's right. So I didn't know about the Argentina connection. And was there any affinity or connection to German culture before you went to the German school? It just happened to be an opportunity. How did you get there?
Right. I mean, my parents, they really had more of a romantic affinity to Germany. I would say they just loved German literature and movies. And so that's why they sent me to a German school, even in kindergarten. And so my first real exam that I had to pass was to tell Red Riding Hood, right? And before entering first grade. And that's when I basically passed the test because I had to learn Germany just from scratch. These international schools, are also often where kids go that have, one of the parents is German and the other is Spanish, for example. And in my case, both my parents were Spanish. And to this day, my father doesn't speak any German. So it was really just more for giving me this opportunity and for affinity to German culture.
Right. Yeah. So that does take you to Argentina, and where you are introduced or get involved more in the arts and more inspired in the arts. And that really is the start of photography for you. And the influence of theater and staging, which is why we're talking today, is your book, Archipelago, published by Kehrer Verlag. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah. I noticed you were on sabbatical last year. Was that for the book?
Actually, it wasn't. I had a project that I wanted to pursue and that I did pursue, but I got, a little sidetracked because of the book, because the book had a lot of delays. The book, actually, I started talking with Kehrer many years ago. I mean, not that many, but 7 years ago. And then, we paused it during the pandemic, and anyway, a lot of things happened that it just got, started and then stopped again. And the book was going to be published in the summer, but then ended up being published in the fall. I was on press in October, and it was released in January in Europe, and they do it kind of in 2 stages. Now it's going to be released in September in the US. And in all the months in Europe, we got quite a bit of press. And so there were multiple events that I attended. And so my actual sabbatical project got interrupted always because of these things. But of course, it was for a good reason, so I cannot complain.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Absolutely. So the delays, of course, in the publishing world are well known as with tariffs and other things and printers and of course, the news of Steidl practically going out of business and so many, real financial difficulties in the book publishing world, which has been really flourishing for many, many years now.
Yes. Shocking, right? The title, yeah. So you must know Dave Freund, right? If you were 2005.
Yes, so Dave Freund and I say we overlap. Dave Freund was an institution at Ramapo.
Exactly.
And I believe I was hired by Dave Freund. I believe so. I mean, I believe when I applied, he would have been in charge of the hiring of adjuncts.
Yeah. What a nice man, right?
He was so nice. Yeah. A generous, nice, wonderful photographer, just steeped in the history of photography. Yes. Yeah. If everyone knew Dave Freund.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. And I'm bringing him up because he published with the Steidl.
Oh, okay. Right.
He did this kind of 4-volume book, a case with these 4 volumes of
the slipcase volumes.
The slipcase volume with the Gas project.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, Dave Freund.
Yes.
You know, we started to talk about the influences you have in your work, and I think Archipelago really is a culmination of work you've been doing all along, and it is 10 years of work. But it is also the idea of stage and theatricality runs through, I think, almost all of your work that I've seen online, at least. And I know from reading interviews and hearing you on another show that you are often asked about how much staging you do, how much direction you do, costuming, location, selection, and all that. And I think that a lot of that has to do with, you know, this idea of photography as truth, and what is truth. And I always try to talk more about believability, or what's believable in a photograph, or convincing, or, you know, the strength of the idea and message in a photograph as opposed to truth, because we know photography lies.
Exactly.
So instead of asking you about how much is staged or what you do in costume and all that, you know, what I'd like to know is more about your ideas for using staging as communication, your idea of being influenced by theater and cinema in your work, and why that is appealing to you.
I think through the influence of my dad and the environment that I grew up, I was interested in stories and telling stories, but inventing stories more than recording stories or capturing stories that already exist. I have a deep respect for documentary photography, but it's not just my thing. I think I need to have the control or the hand in conceptualizing what I want to do and creating an image in my head first, and then making the image, creating it then on film or now digitally. And I use a reference that I like very much, which is the kind of Bertolt Brecht, the playwright. This idea he had about this alienation effect, that he says that if you make it clear that in his work, it was, you know, he wrote plays, right? So that what you are producing on stage is a construction, then the audience will not identify themselves. So it will create a certain distance, a critical distance. Critical, I think, is the key word, and I invite them to ask questions. And I have been thinking about this a lot in my work, because in Archipelago, for example, the images are shot in regular environments. So I have not constructed sets. I don't have that kind of budget, but even if I had that kind of budget, it's not what I would do. I would shoot.
That's interesting, because, you know, with tableau photography, you're often compared to Crutzen, right? And Crutzen is the big budget tableau photographer.
Right.
But I don't think that's a fair comparison, because there is a disbelief to Crutzen's work that he plays into. There's a fantasy in his work, and you're not playing in fantasy. You're playing in reality.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, because I do want to play really with that in between, but more rooted in reality. So using an environment that already exists, but then cleaning it up in such a way that it almost looks like a stage, but like a stage that still is a regular living room, right? Like it still looks like a little bit too impeccable or too clean, and that you start wondering, wait, is this really the way it was, or is it really the color combination so perfect or so coordinated in real life? So those are the kinds of questions that I want, this kind of disbelief in the image as something that is something that I just stumbled upon when I walked into that room.
And well, that's your breaking the fourth wall, is asking us to question the line of reality in the work, right? When you said you're influenced by Brecht, right?
Exactly.
And you do carefully select color and relationship and pose and objects, and you know, I did hear you say you will take things out of a room and all, right? And and that is, of course, all towards what the work is about, and that is connection and relationship and disconnection. And there are two wonderful essays, one by Vicki Goldberg, one by Jean Dykstra, which both center around the work. So they're both actually speaking to the same thing, but they come at it from different perspectives. Vicki Goldberg comes at it from that real social construct idea, that real social pressure idea, the balance between relationship and individuality. And Jean Dykstra speaks more to the aesthetics, the spaces, right? And the construction of that. How did you select these writers, and how do you think in terms of how they wrote about your work?
Yeah, Vicki Goldberg was a professor of mine, was my thesis advisor at RISD.
Oh, wow.
So I knew her from back then, and she had been a very steady supporter of my work through many years. A lovely person, and I always knew that when Archipelago would become a book one day, I wanted her to write the essay. And then when the time came, and she wrote her essay during COVID, and so we communicated. We weren't able to meet. We communicated over phone and email. But then she actually was in a difficult personal situation. Her husband was sick, and then she ended up becoming sick, and she actually passed away before the book came out, and which is really something sad for me that she has not been able to see the book. But even before I knew that Vicki was herself in going through, in her last kind of year, I thought of having a second voice in the book. And one thing I really thought about was whether I wanted a narrative essay, meaning a fictional essay. That's something that a lot of photographers do. And I thought a lot about it, and then decided not to, because I want my images already to have that fictional element. Or I just thought, what if I invite somebody, a great writer, and then maybe this person creates a story, but it's maybe not really my story, and then they would influence the reader how they interpret the image. And that's really something that I didn't want for this body of work. And so I ended up thinking about a more contemporary voice that could also put a perspective on a time also after COVID, because something that also Jean talks about, that these are images that now things had changed. We had experienced a time where we had to be inside forcefully. And also the use of technology had changed. So those are all things that I had thought myself, but I didn't bring them up with her. She brought them up, which was really nice. And and that was a lovely collaboration with her. And then when the two essays were finished, that's when then at the end the book really was able to be finalized. And I'm very happy with them and how they frame. And there are some, there's some aspects that they both address, but they have like you say, different emphasis.
Yeah. And they literally are bookends to the book too. One's at the beginning, one's at the end. So this wasn't, like you were saying, a sort of almost like separate piece that weaves its way through the book. These are frames of the book, frames of the images themselves. The images then stand alone in the interior of the book, right? There's, those are all decisions about how much text to include or whether to have text. And is the text supplementary? Is the text descriptive? Is the text a whole new piece all on its own? There's so many of those things that play into it. One of the things I wanted to point out in both essays is they also speak to influence. And Dykstra mentions Antonio, and I always say the name wrong, Antonioni. And when we hear of Antonioni from photographers, it's usually blow up. Right. But you leaned into the trilogy of Alienation, the three films about it. And of course, if you look at your work, that makes perfect sense. Right. Yeah. But then Goldberg mentions, and I should have mentioned, Vicki Goldberg passed away last year. So yes, that was really unfortunate, sad. But Vicki Goldberg mentions Roland Barthes and Camera Lucida, and it's one of my favorite things when I teach Barthes to students, is the idea that photography is more related to stage and theater than it is than other forms of art in a lot of ways, because there is a alive sense to it, right?
And because also in the early days of photography and portraiture, there's always a sense of performing in front of the camera, right? Especially when the exposures were very long, and it was
That's right.
right. It
That's
was
right.
something that you
Yes.
had to, as a sitter, you had to hold the pose for.
And there was direction, right?
Exactly.
There had to be direction,
right?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes,
Right.
the essays are fantastic, and like I said, a really wonderful frame to the images. So in terms of now, thinking of this as a book and putting the book together, you had 10 years of work. When you started the work, was it Archipelago? Was it more a continuation of something else you were doing? How did it all come together?
I had done a body of work during grad school that was inspired directly by the play of Jean Genet, The Maids. That is a play where these two women that are maids, they are like, this kind of lady, and they perform different roles, and sometimes one is the maid and one is the lady, sometimes both are the maids, and so they basically interchange characters. And I played a little bit.
This is Domestica.
That's Domestica, exactly.
Yes.
So I played with that, and I did that in Argentina, actually, when I was already living in the US, but I traveled at that time still frequently to Argentina. And also, I mean, it resonated with the kind of social reality there that a lot of middle-class families have made. So, and I mean, I was interested in that dynamic anyway, and the kind of power that these roles have, that is kind of like the real emotional power versus the social class that these roles represent. And anyway, but that also had its limitations, of course, because you can only do so much in that kind of very, very defined set of parameters. And then I started thinking more broadly about how we relate to one another, and how the tension between wanting to be together and apart can be captured in a photograph. And one thing that influenced me a lot, that I also had brought kind of with me from my Germany years, that actually is also mentioned in the essays, is Pina Bausch, the choreographer, who in her plays, in her dance theater pieces, she's the kind of first one who called that dance theater, because she included this kind of spoken element to her dance pieces. And I was lucky enough in Germany to go to a lot of her performances. I studied in Cologne, and Pina Bausch Theater was in Wuppertal, and a friend one day said, "Why don't you come one day, check it out?" And this was way before she became a big international star. So the audience would leave halfway through because it was kind of shocking and provocative. And I loved how she portrayed that tension between individuals, often between men and women, and so that sometimes they would just scream at each other, and then like hug each other the next moment. And so there was a lot of this kind of back and forth, and the contradictions, and there was humor in the work, and it was very beautiful. And that has been a big influence for me then when I started doing Archipelago. I wanted to capture that kind of tension and contradiction in an image. And how can I do that in a photograph? That is a very, photography is a very different medium, very different language, of course. You have the stillness of the shot. So how can I play with space? How can the space be an extension, psychological extension of the characters? How can color have an emotional impact? All those elements that I started to kind of incorporate, that opened up also many more possibilities that I had been playing with in Domestica. That the color palette in Domestica is very kind of limited. It's like a lot of pinks and reds, and but in an Archipelago, each shot I had to plan very carefully, and so it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, pink is a popular color in your work, right? And pink is often associated with femininity or girls, or right? Is that part of the play of the color that you're using?
Yeah, there's a few images where the walls are pink. Like there's that two girls in this room that almost looks like a dollhouse.
Yes.
And then I saw it, and then I wanted to really emphasize that.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to have the remaining color palette pretty neutral to really bring out that pink. And then in another shot was another room that was also very pink. And so it's not a deliberate choice that I'm gravitating towards pink, but when I saw it, I really wanted to bring it out and make the most out of it.
Yeah. Well, in the work itself, do you draw distinctions in terms of gender and the way, you're presenting the meaning in the photo, the relationship, the connection in the photo?
You say like in a relationship that is like a heterosexual relationship?
So yeah, right, if you're presenting something that would be a heterosexual relationship, or if there is a photograph where the man might be more forward than the woman in the photograph, do you think about power dynamics and gender relationship in the work?
I wasn't thinking that as a general category for the entire body of work. In individual images, then I have. When I was constructing them, when I always worked with friends and family, so I was inspired by them, but what I knew about them, what they suggested to me, what the kind of the stories that I had heard about them. And then also,
so you're working more from what is actually there in front of you, in a sense, like what they've shared with you and what you know about them.
What I know about them, but then they're not themselves really. They're playing a character in that moment. So it's not... It's otherwise it would be a portrait of them, and it's not really a portrait of them. So I am inspired by that, by what they bring to the table, but then I kind of work with them. And in the same way also, for example, Pina Bausch that did that with her dancers, that they would kind of tell stories, or just she would ask them questions and then they would share with the group stories about their childhood, and then she would use those stories. Or in the same way that novelists also, they develop characters based on real people they know, but then they become characters, right? So it's a little bit that, working with, with the raw material is like...
No, it's like working towards an actor's strength in a way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so in those moments, then yes, I would sometimes think about, in this photograph, I want this person to have a powerful or a more dominant role than the other, but not kind of in general, like a general rule for the entire body of work, just kind of develop picture by picture.
And you were saying that there are characters, right? And they're not themselves. And we don't know who they are or really anything about them until the very end, where there's a list of plates and first names, is it? And just so even then we don't really know, who they are. It's more like just a title and a credit, right? In a sense, right?
Yeah. Right.
So are you doing book tours? Are you doing signings? What's happening with the book now?
So I started this already in November last year, which is when the book kind of was pre-launched in Paris at Paris Photo. We did, the first signing there, which was really exciting. And then, like I said before, it launched in Spain. So I was at Photo London in May, and we did a signing there. And in Madrid, I did a book talk, a book launch at La Fábrica, which is a kind of nice bookstore in Madrid. They're kind of the co-organizers of Foto España, the festival. And then also I did a signing in Arles. And so I'm just kind of back. I just came back a few weeks ago, and now we're working towards the dates for New York book event. I don't have it 100%. We're almost there. We have almost figured it out.
One of the things I forgot to mention, of course, is all the text is in English and Spanish. So when you published this book, you had in mind you were going to go home with this book and make sure it was also open to audiences who spoke Spanish, right?
Yes. Thank you for bringing that up, because that was a very important aspect for me. I have lived in the United States since the time I came from Argentina and have developed my career here. So I have really not shared my work in Spain as much as I would like to. And so a big part of my decision of seeking out a European publisher was to be able to distribute it in Europe and also to share it with a European audience. And so all the last months, all the work that I did in Europe and with all these events and all the press that we got was really just very important for me, because I definitely wanted it to be in two languages and available in Spain, but also in, available in, for Spanish-speaking readers.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. One of the things that, photographers have to then deal with is a project really over? How does is a body of work done? Do you think in terms of real hard beginnings and ends to the work that you do?
That's a really good question, because it was really hard to find that end for this project. And I basically transitioned out into another project that was called Encounter, where I thought, well, I just now want to explore how people, meet, or what is the dynamic and the tension when, instead of just being apart or the desire to be apart, just when people meet for the first time or go on a date, or how can I capture that again in a photograph? But in the first couple of months, even maybe year, I was still in the mindset of Archipelago, and it was just hard for me to even make those kinds of images. And I even made some of the images, I think just a few in the book. There was in my mind, when I was about to make the picture, I was already in a different project, but it ended up being still an Archipelago image. But then there was a point where I was done, and then I transitioned out. And that project Encounter was really more of a transitional project. It was not such an important project for me at the end, not until I found really something kind of that really was a more substantive project later, that I could feel like I was really, onto something else.
Right.
Yeah. So that's hard. It's hard to find that.
Yes. You're in transition. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So you've been teaching for a good 15 years now, 16 years?
I've been teaching at Ramapo for 16 years. And before, I taught at Southern Connecticut State for 3 years, also full time. And then, like you said before, I taught at different places as an adjunct. Yes.
Yeah. So almost the same as me. I've been teaching since 2000, I think 2000. Yes.
Wow. Great.
Yeah, yeah. So where have you seen photo education go in the last 20 years, 25 years or so? How have you thought about it and in the changes that you've seen? And, we've seen digital photography come up in our own practices, and then film photography make a resurgence in our, during the time we've been teaching. How do you deal with that yourself personally? And I know you shoot 4x5, right? And then, how does that affect your teaching?
Well, I should probably also contextualize where I have taught, because my first job full time was at SUNY Purchase, and that is a BFA program, and so that is a program where just students already come with, very dedicated, or they know that's what they want to do. And now at Ramapo, where I've been for 16 years, it's a liberal arts college. It's a public liberal arts college, which makes it so unique, because it has really just the spirit of liberal arts, in the sense that students are encouraged to explore different things. And so the focus and the emphasis is a different one. Sometimes we have students who then, start in the visual arts program and then gravitate towards photography later. Then we have some transfer students who already know they want to do photography. So it's a very mixed population. And in that sense, it is a very different experience than teaching at a BFA program like at SUNY Purchase. And
that's a good distinction, because I'm in liberal arts, obviously, college as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. I was looking up Mercer.
Mercer?
So, yeah. Yeah. So, and I like that because of also my background and my interest. I love being in an environment where it has the possibility, or it opens up possibilities to collaborate with colleagues in other disciplines like theater, music, and they are really there in the same building. It's just more integrated than in a school where there's a dedicated photography program. And to your question about photography itself, yeah, it has changed a lot. And I mean, it's interesting, you and I, because I think we started teaching at a time where things were changing very much, right?
Absolutely.
And where really we needed to kind of make that shift to digital and, trying out those early scanners and this early, just all the materiality and the output, that learning curve. And now seeing it come back to more, hands-on and analog processes is very interesting. And I am glad that where I have taught, there was always a darkroom, a black and white darkroom, and I teach a large format class, and it's a hard class because large format is hard. But students are interested. It's not for everybody, but it's something that I think just provides a very different experience. And now even more this year, we're seeing that the more hands-on classes are having a higher enrollment. So I'm really curious to see where this is headed toward. I have been away this last year, but I am interested in developing an alternative processes class now. So
Same.
Yes. Okay. Pick up your notes.
Yes. Yeah. I had an alternative process class for years, and then the enrollment decline in that was so great, we stopped running it. And now, again, I find myself trying to allow for more time in Photo 1 and Photo 2 for alt processes so students can experience more of that. We've been doing so much with cyanotype the last few years. But also pinhole, and I broke out the 4x5 cameras for the first time probably in 10 years, just 2 years ago. So it's really interesting and wonderful to see. And I think for me the goal is to try to not show or have this sort of suggestion of anything being better than anything else. I want students to feel perfectly comfortable shooting all digital, shooting all film, not using a camera, whatever they want to do, you know. And, even though I was raised in a very traditional straight photography, film-based photography, and then I went all digital for many years, and now I'm back to shooting film again. I just don't want to be dogmatic. That's what I try not to be.
Right. I mean, same. Yes. I actually developed for a first-year seminar a cell phone photography class, which has been really fun, and I'm going to teach it again this fall.
Nice.
And the students, the first time I did it, had a lot of fun, and myself too. So also a different way of thinking about making images and also connecting it with with a larger purpose of photography in this day and age. So there's a lot of things to talk about. And so I think we are kind of sharing similar.
Well, I will have to visit.
Yeah, same. I would love to visit.
Yeah, that'll be great. All right. Excellent. Well, thank you. This has been a pleasure.
It has been really, really great to be on your show. I'm a big fan. And
thank you.
It was really a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Real Photo Show is produced by me, Michael Chovan-Dalton. Music by Matteo Chovan-Dalton and Jim Raimundo. If you like the show, please rate and review with all the stars on your listening platform.